Hey, what's up, guys? So we're going to be working on a tutorial for killing zombies, and we're going to go through each stage of what we need to do to set that up. So I'll go ahead and play the scene for you and show you what our scene looks like. So we just have a little bit of an environment that we can run around in, and our little zombie cubes are going to be coming through these corridors, and they're going to be trying to attack our stockpile. And every time they reach the stockpile, they'll take away a certain amount of damage, and if the damage gets to zero, then we have lost the game. So to equip ourselves, we're going to need a gun. So the first thing we're going to do is set that up. So I'm going to go into my scene. I'm just going to create a stand-in object. I'm going to create a little cube, and I'll parent that beneath my camera like so, and then I'll zero it out. So that's occupying the exact same position as my camera's pivot. And I'll just go ahead and scale it down. I think today I will, instead of creating a pulse rifle, I'll create just a little magnum. So let me take a look. I can adjust it while looking at my game view so that I know how I'm doing with placement. So, okay, I think that that's gonna do us for the gun. So I'll go ahead and name that. I'll change the name from cube to handgun, like so. And now we're gonna set up a firing manager that's gonna allow us to control shooting the gun. So let me just go ahead and I'll put this back over here like so. I'm gonna say create, and I'm gonna create an empty object, and I will zero it out, and we'll call this empty object, our game object, our fire manager. And so this is going to have our FSM placed on it, and it's going to control all of our shooting. So let's go ahead and put the FSM on it. I'll go ahead and create a new FSM with the fire manager selected. And the first state, it's going to be our wait for input. And our second stage will be our raycast. So this is going to be the first part of what we need to do to detect whether or not we've hit something, and if we need to do additional things to that object, if we've hit the right thing. If we've hit a zombie, we need to take health off of it. If we've hit part of the level, we don't need to do anything. So, okay, that wait for input, we're going to transition to the raycast state by, we're going to do just a mouse click. So I'll double click in my state window, and I'll search for mouse button down. That's the one that I want. Okay, and so this, we'll just configure this. The button we'll click is the left, and then we're going to send the finished event. And we should move into our raycast. So let's go ahead and set up the raycast now. So I'm just going to search for raycast. And I will add that action. And so let's configure this one now. So let's take a look. So the game object that I want to shoot the ray from, that's going to be our handgun. So I need to specify the game object, and I'll drag and drop the handgun into the game object slot. And I need to specify a direction that the ray is going to travel in. So I just need to give it a forward vector. And if I have my handgun selected, and I make sure that I'm in local space, that I want it to shoot out of the Z vector. I want it to travel along this line, and that's going to be positive Z. So now going back to the raycast, I'll go ahead and specify that just by giving us a positive number by just filling out a 1 in that Z, and then it'll know to shoot out in positive Z. So that's going to be traveling in self space, and the distance the raycast is going to travel is going to be 100 units. That might be enough, but just in case, we can crank that up to let's go to 300. So okay, so we're going to shoot a raycast out of the gun, and let's go ahead and turn on debug so we can see that happening. And just to make sure that this is working the way that we want it to, let's go ahead and test this. So let's attach a temporary action that allows us to cycle this event. So I'm going to use a next frame event, and I will attach a finished action, and we'll go right back to the first state after one frame. Like so. So now let's give it a play, and let's make sure that the FSM is functioning the way that we want it to. So we are clicking, and it's moving in and out of the raycast state. So let's go ahead and look at the scene view. Let's go ahead and put these guys side by side. So because we turned on the debug, so we should be seeing that yellow raycast fire out in positive Z, and that's what we are seeing. So as that raycast is traveling, it's going to start hitting objects with colliders, and we can get information back. Okay, so it's working. We're in good shape. So I'll go ahead and delete that temporary action. We don't need it anymore. So let's gather some information based off the stuff that we hit. So the first thing we need to determine is whether or not we've actually hit something. If we don't hit anything, we don't need to play any particle effects. So we're going to store the did hit, which is just a bool. Did we hit something? Did we not hit something? So we'll create a new variable for that. And then we'll call this our hit test. We will store the game object that we hit as object hit if we hit anything. And right now we're just defining variables. We do need to define the point hit so that we can spawn particle effects there. So I'll create a new variable, and we'll call this our point hit. Right now, we don't need to store the normal, and we don't necessarily need to store the distance for this case. So let's continue with our FSM. We're going to need to do things based on whether or not we've actually made that hit. So that's going to be stored in our hit test variable. So after the raycast, let's transition in or out of this state based on what the result of that is. So let's do a bool test. So the bool variable that we're testing is the hit test. And if we did hit something, if that's a yes, we're going to transition into our next state. And this state is going to be our effects states. So we're going to spawn effects here. And to allow me to go to the spawn effect state, let's create a couple of events. So those will be pretty simple. We'll just say did hit will be our first event, and then our second one will be the opposite, did not hit. So I'll attach those. Did hit. So if we did hit, we'll go to the next state. If we did not hit, we'll just go back to the first state, and we will ready ourselves for another input. So add transition, did not hit. Okay, so now we can go back to the first action. So let's spawn those effects, and I'll show you kind of what I have is just a little temporary position, a little temporary prefab that we can use for our effects. It's just a very simple particle system. A particle system that bursts and has a little bit of collision, a little bit of gravity on it. And so that'll be the feedback for the player that they've hit something, and they can kind of determine which point in space they've hit based on where that is being spawned. And then I'll show you also, so this spark, when I made it into a prefab, I also added a FSM on it, which basically will just clean it up and remove it from the scene. So what that looks like is, let me enable editing of the prefab so I can show you. So if I grab the spark, when it spawns in, it just waits for 1.5 seconds. And after the 1.5 seconds, it's supposed to send the finished event, which I did not do. And it will transition into the second state called destroy, where it destroys itself. So this FSM that is set up on this object, it ensures that the particle effect just doesn't hang around in the scene too long. So we're going to be spawning a bunch of those at the point that we hit based on what that raycast tells us. So I made a change, right? I didn't have this field filled out, so I corrected my mistake. I put finished, and now on the prefab, with the prefab selected, I'll hit apply. So hopefully that change persists on the actual object. Let me go ahead and delete this, and I will look. Yeah, okay. So if I grab the same prefab in my project, then it looks like that this is filled out correctly. Okay, cool. So we're ready to go, ready to plug that in. I'll go back to my Fire Manager, and underneath Spawn Effects, we've stored our hit point as point hit. So I will do a create object. And the game object we want to spawn, that is our Spark prefab, and the spawn point that we want to spawn it at is our object hit. Oh, excuse me, the object hit, it's taking a game object. We don't want to use that. We want to use our position because that will take a vector 3. So there it is. There's our point hit variable. So I'll plug that in there. Okay, so let's just double check here. We're going to hit the left mouse button. We're going to raycast and get some information. And if we did hit something, we will... Oh, okay, so this was not filled out. Good thing we checked. Okay, so is true, we're going to say did hit, and is false, did not hit. So this bool test will transition us in and out of that raycast state based on whether or not we actually hit anything. And so I'll do another temporary next frame event so that we can cycle this and we can do it multiple times. So instead of doing this, instead of doing a finished event and creating all this spaghetti, which is going to get pretty messy, let's go ahead and clear this. Delete transition, there it is. Okay, so we will create an event, we'll create a reset event, and we'll attach that as a global event by right-clicking back into the start state and saying add global transition reset. So now we can call that from any state, and we will go right back to wherever we specify. So let's go ahead and do a next frame event. And we'll say reset. Okay, so let's try this now. All right. So this is working as intended. We can see where we're hitting, and you can see if you look at the hierarchy that our sparks are also cleaning up, which is what we want. So now let's go ahead and let's shoot in between these pillars here. And you can see, because we're not hitting anything, the raycast gives us that information, and we're testing it with the bool test. And because we're not hitting anything, we're just going back to the first state. So, okay, so far so good. So right now we've at least created a gun effect. And just to make this a little bit more clear, I think it would be good if we brought in some sound effects. Okay, so we grabbed the sound effects off of our desktop, and now we're gonna plug in a sound for the gunshot. So I'll go back to the Fire Manager, and regardless of whether we've hit anything, we want to play that in the raycast action, because that'll just be the sound of the gun firing, acknowledging that we've clicked. So we will do a play sound, and we can define a position that the sound plays at, and the audio clip and the volume. We can do that. That's kind of a little bit, it's a little bit boring, because we're just going to get the same sound over and over again, and that'll be kind of annoying. So we can go to Ecosystem, and we can get a better version of that, which would be the Play Sound Advanced. So let's go ahead and grab that action. So with this action in particular, the thing that we want to change that we can't do just using the normal play sound is we want to adjust the pitch every time the gun fires, so every shot is slightly different. Okay, so we're going to use the action Play Audio Advanced, and it allows us to change a bunch of the attributes of the sound that we're going to play. Let me go ahead and we'll play this first before we do anything else. So we want to specify the object that's going to be playing the sound, and that's going to be our handgun. And it's telling us that we need to add an audio component to the handgun so that it can hold a sound effect. So let's click, and then it's going to add a emitter, a sound emitter. The clip that we want to play, if I look in my sound effects folder, we have a gunshot sound, little laser sounds. So let's go ahead and use that gunshot, and we'll put that there as our one-shot clip. So the thing that we want to modify is going to be the pitch, so that every shot sounds slightly different. Let me just check the rest of my settings here. Okay. So I think the rest of that is fine. So for the pitch, let's actually go ahead and we'll use a variable. So we'll do a new variable for that pitch, because we're going to change it every time we fire the gun. So this will be our gunshot pitch. And we need to generate that as well. So let's go ahead and add an action to generate that number. So that's going to be a float random float. And we're going to go between, so normally the pitch is just going to be at 1. That's the default pitch. So we're going to go between 0.8 and 1.2. So there's a 0.4 pitch variation in this. And we'll test this, and we'll see if we can actually hear this. So the result, so between those two numbers, we're going to store that as the gunshot pitch. And we will play that audio every time we fire the gun. Okay, so let's give that a try, and let's listen for the gunshot to vary as we fire the weapon. Okay, slight variation. Very subtle. Let's change this even more. Let me just double check on the, let's see here. Okay. So let's double that. So we're gonna go farther out another 0.4. And this will be 1.6. Okay. So let's try that. Let's see how it sounds now. Okay, so those low ones are definitely very, very low. I'm not hearing the difference in the highs necessarily. So I think I'll pull that back to 0.8. Okay, let's give that a shot. Okay, slight variation. It's not the best, but this is a placeholder sound, so that'll work for me. All right, so our gun works. The gun is set up. So now in the next part, we're gonna go to actually making the AI and giving them a little bit of logic so that they can spawn into the scene and they can start going after our target.